Good evening. Assalamu alaikum rahmatullahi wa barakatuh and welcome to Talking Point. My name is Fahraaz Patel. We'd like to thank you, the viewer, for staying with us here on Hilaal TV, DSTV channel 347. I've got three words for you. W-O-W. Wow. What a week it has been in South Africa. And I'm not talking about last week Thursday's State of the Nation address. I'm talking about the diplomatic row that is ensuing between South Africa and the United States of America. Now, last week, Monday, through executive orders, US President Donald Trump signed a declaration stating that the US will be cutting all funding from a medical perspective to South Africa. This is because he claims South Africa is currently conducting land grabs. Now, to give context to this, around 2018, reports had indicated that AfriForum had lobbied the United States government with regards to concerns over what was then the Land Expropriation Bill. Now, just last month, President Cyril Ramaphosa changed that bill through the President's prerogative to an act. And this has, of course, seen various stakeholders expressing disappointment on the act, but there are also stakeholders who are disappointed with the previous lobbying to the US government, many of them accusing AfriForum of quote-unquote gaslighting, or even, just this week, treason. So, today on Talking Point, we've decided to invite AfriForum to have this discussion. And joining me, I'd like to welcome their Head of Public Relations, Ernst van Zyl. Ernst, good day. Thank you so much for joining us here on Talking Point on Hilaal TV.
Good afternoon, Fahraaz. I'm looking forward to the conversation. Let's clear up some facts and dispel myths. I'm looking forward to it.
Okay, no problem. And that's why we have you here, of course, to go ahead and speak from AfriForum's perspective. Right. So, 48 hours ago, the MK party laid a charge of treason against you guys for saying, quote-unquote, that you guys are misleading Donald Trump on land reform in South Africa. I just want to get your response to this. Is AfriForum inciting this treason?
Well, it feels, I don't feel like a serious person when I give too much time of day to these types of accusations. I mean, it's very clearly just a PR stunt from political parties and individuals to get some social media clout, some social media attention. There's nothing in it. There's no legal expert in this country that will say there's anything in these types of accusations. And from AfriForum's side, I mean, it's very clear. They're just absurd. To tell the truth about South Africa is not treasonous. And anyone that claims that AfriForum is spreading misinformation, I have a very simple challenge to those types of people, and that's just show me the proof of the misinformation. Then we can talk about it, but just using the word misinformation is not some magic word. It doesn't really cut it. You have to point to examples of it and proof of what AfriForum said that is not true, and then we can actually have a conversation. So that's simply my challenge to those people making those accusations. The question of treason, as I said, I feel unserious to give it too much time. It is just a PR stunt.
All right. Now, I want to touch on gaslighting. Other organizations have said there's gaslighting also that's occurring. Now, I think both you and I would agree. We're in a situation right now where even though we are 31 years into democracy, inequality still exists. There still seems to be a lot of anger, a lot of harboring towards what was then apartheid and colonialism. Now, obviously, you're going to disagree with the statements that there is gaslighting. But there are certain sections, of course, of many of our compatriots, black, white, and Indian, saying that, listen, what AfriForum's doing right now is really inciting supposed racial hatred. What is your response with regards to that?
Well, what AfriForum is doing is shining a light on the truth. I mean, the definition of gaslighting is to try to convince someone to not believe their lying eyes. And that's not what AfriForum is doing. AfriForum is bringing facts to the table. Again, the same challenge applies, where if someone wants to claim that AfriForum is spreading misinformation or gaslighting, whatever buzzword they want to use to smear the organization, they should come with the facts. They should come with the evidence. At the moment, there's a battle in South Africa between vibes and facts. AfriForum is on the side of facts. I can tell you all the facts backing up what AfriForum is saying. And on the other side are people attacking AfriForum based on vibes. And again, genuine genuine request. No, I'm not trying to be snarky. When anyone accuses AfriForum of these things, they really should be giving examples and proof, not just using terms like misinformation or gaslighting or whatever. That would really help actually move the conversation forward. Otherwise, it's just, like I said, otherwise it's just vibes.
Right, let's touch on this Land Expropriation Act.
Yes.
And again, both you and I, Ernst, would agree that the country has come through a very dark past. It's 400 years of colonialism and apartheid. And many feel that the Land Expropriation Act, in many ways, allows for there to be some sort of redistribution, also some sort of relief to those who had suffered. Right. Do you not feel that in the current form that the Land Expropriation Act is, this was the only way that government could go ahead and address what has been the land question, which has been in discussion for so many decades, and the fact that this section allowed for this discussion to occur?
You see, this is where AfriForum's stance is so comfortable for me as a spokesperson, because our stance is very simple, it's very concise, and it's very consistent. Expropriation without compensation was wrong in the past, and it is wrong in the present. You do not correct a past wrong with a present wrong. Two wrongs do not make a right. And when it comes to particularly there's a long list of problems that South Africa is facing. I think you'll be hard pressed to find someone that denies South Africa isn't currently facing a crime crisis, an unemployment crisis, an electricity generation crisis, and many, many more of infrastructure collapse crisis. There's so many different crises currently, a corruption crisis, and you'll struggle to find anyone that denies these problems exist. The real debate comes into how do you solve these problems. And I mean, again, this is where the nuance comes in. Just because there's a serious issue doesn't mean every solution that is tabled is the right solution. And expropriation without compensation is definitely not the solution to the problems that South Africa faces. It will actually aggravate a lot of these problems. So as I said, just to sum up, that is AfriForum's stance, is that you do not fix a current pot. You don't fill a pothole by digging a new one. The ends do not justify the means. Your means have to be just as well.
All right. Now, the willing buyer, willing seller perspective comes into this. Right. Now, that is, of course, when reading the Act, a lot of it contains that. When I spoke to analysts to discuss just immediately when the Act was signed, a lot of them were saying, look, one needs to look at the willing buyer, willing seller scenario. When one looks at it from that perspective, how does AfriForum respond to that, given that that really isn't land expropriation without compensation? That is land expropriation with compensation, but from a certain extent where it's a sale that is happening between buyer and seller.
Well, Fahraaz, I'm very glad that you clearly understand the different nuances when it comes to this debate. That's why I think our conversation is going very well in regards to we're actually having a conversation that's progressing. It's not just walking into a wall. Particularly this concept of willing buyer, willing seller is at the crux. You're correct, at the crux of the debate. That's exactly why AfriForum has a serious problem with the Expropriation Act, in the sense that it enables expropriation without compensation. AfriForum has no problem with expropriation with compensation, fair and just compensation. That's how expropriation laws all across the world work in regards to property. But this act specifically opens the door for expropriation without compensation, which is unconstitutional and would be a violation of people's right to private property. So that's where the issue comes in, particularly this whole what the bill enables in specifics, the expropriation without compensation. Just to repeat, AfriForum has no problem with expropriation with just and fair compensation. That is a platform for just and fair expropriation, but not expropriation without compensation. That's what AfriForum is against.
Okay, this is a question that's going to lead to the break, Ernst, with regards to what would AfriForum have done different to the actual act that was signed by President Ramaphosa last month. Of course, you mentioned it right over there. AfriForum, as an organization, would prefer expropriation with compensation. Is that the only clause within this act that AfriForum would have changed if consulted about it?
So there's actually a myriad of technical points to point to that are problematic about this bill, but there's about three that I think are the most important and most relevant for your listeners to understand. So the first one is that when the Act talks about where expropriation without compensation would be applied, that list is non-exhaustive. It uses the terminology including but not limited to. So there's a myriad of other scenarios where this expropriation without compensation will come in that the Act is not listing. It leaves the door open. Secondly, there's also the matter of, this is what you've already touched on, the matter of nil compensation. Nil compensation is just a synonym for no compensation, and this is not just me saying that. The ANC itself has communicated that they understand nil compensation meaning no compensation. I have the quotes here if you want to get into that more specifically. And then there's the matter, the last point that I think is critical where AfriForum has a serious issue with this Act is the 5-year court wait, 5-year plus court wait that could ensue when a property, for example, a farm, has been expropriated without compensation. You then have to go challenge it in the courts, but you don't keep your property during that challenge. You lose your property during that challenge until that is concluded, and that can take 5+ years in South Africa, ruining you financially, leaving you destitute without a residence, leaving you without the property where you resided. That's not a fair situation at all. So those are some of the points that AfriForum have a serious issue with. Like I say, there's other technical issues, but those are the main ones.
Well, after the break, I continue my conversation with Ernst van Zyl from AfriForum. We're going to be continuing this discussion on the Land Expropriation Act that was signed last month by President Cyril Ramaphosa. Do stay tuned. Welcome back to Talking Point. I'm in conversation with Ernst van Zyl, who is the Head of Public Relations at AfriForum. Thank you so much for staying with us, Ernst. Well, it's clear that AfriForum as a lobby group are not happy about the consultations regarding this amendment to the Constitution regarding land expropriation. Now, I think both you and I will agree that this is, of course, the President's prerogative. It's in the Constitution. It's not much you and I can do with regards to any act that is signed by the President. But as a lobby group, what is it that, should the doors have been open to consultation, did AfriForum want to talk to government about regarding the specific act?
So in regards to AfriForum's communication with the government over the years, I mean, we've been in communication with the government. We've sent letters. We've made our grievances with this bill, now an act, very clear. But those grievances were simply just ignored, and the bill was just pushed through into an act. I mean, that's why when AfriForum finds ourselves in this position where we actually have to use other avenues to challenge it, like the courts, rather than just simply communicating with the government as we tried in the past. So the communication lines were open. We were willing to work with the government, but we were given the cold shoulder. The door was slammed in our face. And now that AfriForum is using alternative ways to challenge this act, now suddenly the government wants to talk. I mean, well, the opportunity was there for it. AfriForum was still open to discussing with the government and working out a way forward where property rights are protected in South Africa. But we'll see what the ball is now in the South African government's court. We'll see how they react.
Okay, I want to talk about this potential if, of course, lines of communication do get open, Ernst. What is it that the discussion with government would need to be? Now, remember something, obviously, government is trying to also satisfy its constituency, because many believe that this is a step in the right direction after 31 years of democracy. But of course, AfriForum and other groups who are associated to yourselves are also saying, well, listen, this is not the way to go ahead and approach this. And of course, the Constitution, the Bill of Rights, allows for groups like AfriForum, Solidarity, and many others to have a very similar approach. Do you see a middle ground with regards to this? Do you see a supposed solution to this where each side is satisfied given the complexity and the fragility of the situation?
Well, there is actually, the good news is there is a middle ground solution where the government can still continue with its land redistribution initiatives without violating the private property rights of South Africans. And that option has been on the table for many decades, and that is the restitution process that was put in place about 30 years, just about 25 years or so ago. The restitution process that is in place specifically states that if you were dispossessed by the previous regime, you can follow this process to get your land back. But that process is based on fair and adequate compensation, not on no compensation. But unfortunately, that restitution process has been completely derailed over the years by corruption, mismanagement, cronyism, land being redistributed not to the people that put in the successful land claims, but rather to the people with the right political connections. So AfriForum's solution is actually the middle ground solution. It is to fix the restitution process that is in place, that is already there, not to grant the government more power to expropriate, especially now without compensation. That is not the way to go. That's not a middle ground solution. That is an extreme approach to the issue.
Ernst, let's touch on land grabs, because I watched your press conference, actually the organization's press conference on Sunday, and I followed quite closely with regards to land grabs. I think many South Africans are in agreement that you can't just rock up to land and take it. It's completely illegal. It's stated in the Constitution. To say it at least, it's even a criminal offense. Now, you mentioned something earlier on about land restitution. And of course, there was this agreement that was signed 25 years ago. And of course, a myriad of problems had followed with regards to that. Has government missed a trick with regards to dealing with land grabs, given that this has allowed anyone now to take land because of the lack of looking into the foresight with regards to land restitution?
Well, I think the main issue when it comes to land grabs is the fact, and illegal land invasions, is the fact that the South African police service seem completely overwhelmed with the problem. They don't seem to be able to deal with the problem. So when it comes to particularly the issue of illegal invasions of land in South Africa, the government really just needs to equip and train the police and give them the mandate to be able to deal with land invasions in South Africa to protect private property rights. It seems like the South African government is actually quite hesitant to deal with land invasions, because then they would be attacked by some of their opponents as anti-revolutionary or anti-land restitution or whatever. I mean, completely baseless attacks against them in that regard. Because they would just be enforcing the law. You can't just occupy someone's land illegally. So I think what the root of the issue is particularly the government not acting decisively in regards to protecting people's property from land invasions. And there's a myriad of reasons for it. As I said, there's the political incentive of the government not wanting to be seen, taking action against people invading land, but also the police just seems completely overwhelmed and ill-equipped to be able to deal with the problem. So that's also a serious point of concern. The government needs to act against land invasions in South Africa and illegal land occupations in South Africa. That's the law, and it needs to be applied consistently and frequently.
Ernst, that said, obviously we've got this act that has been signed. Does this enhance those who want to commit land grabs, or does this act supposedly govern any land grabs that could happen? I say govern, meaning stop any supposed land grabs that could happen. Is there a way that government can really hold the two together and say, well, we can handle it and try and find us a way going forward?
Well, on the one side, there's no way in this act that really protects private property rights. So I wouldn't say that it does that, and it stops illegal land invasions. But at the same time, it emboldens land invasions with the government through its own rhetoric, where it's now talking about, for the past 4 or 5 years, the government has been explicitly talking about land expropriation without compensation, redistributing land. And then when people hear that type of rhetoric and they take things into their own hands, the government doesn't stop them, and this type of bill or this type of act emboldens land invasions, as we've already seen in provinces like Limpopo. There have been cases of that. So specifically in regards to the government's reaction, they've really not come out very strong or firm against land invasions in regards to the law being broken. So they're not instilling confidence when it comes to their ability or even their desire to protect people's private property rights. And this expropriation act doesn't really help the situation. It actually just throws more fuel on the fire. So when it comes to particularly people that want land, people that want to have land to build their residence on or to live on. The government already has massive amounts of land in its possession that it needs to start redistributing to people. That's a perfect place to start, but they don't. Earlier in this conversation, you mentioned the willing buyer, willing seller model. In South Africa, the problem is not the willing buyer, willing seller model. The problem in South Africa is an unwilling distributor of land that we have in the government. The South African government owns more than 17 million hectares of land. I know that's a big sum. I myself can't really picture it. So to help the audience and people to picture it, that is the land area of the provinces of Mpumalanga and KwaZulu-Natal combined. And if the government can't even redistribute the land that it has in its possession, I don't really trust it to redistribute any other land that it will hoard through expropriation without compensation. So I think if the government really wants to prove that it is able to redistribute land, it should start with the land that it has already hoarded in its possession. The government has only redistributed about 6% of land into private hands through its land reform program. So I think there's the place to start. Put your redistribution where your mouth is. The government shouldn't be surprised when people don't trust it to not hoard land all for itself. It should prove that it can do that, and it has millions of hectares of land at its disposal to exactly make that point.
Right. Ernst, before we go to the break, the leftist parties within South Africa, I'm going to mention one in specific. Of course, it's one AfriForum knows quite well, and it's one AfriForum hasn't seen eye to eye with on, let's say, every aspect of it. That's the economic freedom fighters. Now, they in the last few years have said that they want to take the land of the beneficiaries of apartheid and colonialism. They've mentioned the families of Johan Rupert, the Oppenheimer family, and various others. They said that they have land which, of course, was taken from them, obviously due to the years of colonialism. Now, for the viewer out there that's listening and saying, okay, well, given how apartheid was constructed, given how colonialism was constructed, there's a justification for that. But of course, there's the law of private property. How does one find a middle ground with regards to that?
Well, the EFF stance is pretty radical to the point where there isn't really a middle ground between theirs and the right to private property. The EFF stance is very clearly that all land should be in the hands of the state, which means there is no room in whatsoever for private property. So I don't think there is a way to square those two views. I think Section 25 of the South African Constitution that protects private property rights in this country is absolutely crucial. And any party or individual that seeks to destroy that constitutional right is inviting economic chaos and destruction on South Africa. And I think anyone that opposes that type of chaos, anyone that opposes that type of anarchy and lawlessness are the good guys. In regards to particularly lawlessness, I mean, the EFF itself, I mean, AfriForum has won more than, I think, about 6 court cases we've won against the EFF where they wanted to have the right to incite land invasions, and AfriForum took them to court and said, no, that is not something protected under freedom of expression in South Africa. You can't incite people to do illegal land grabs. And AfriForum won 6 times in a row against the EFF. But those types of cases reveal something, and that is the fact that the EFF has a deep desire to want to be able to incite lawlessness. And there isn't really a compromise between lawlessness and law and order, or a compromise between no property rights and private property rights. You either have them or you don't. So those aren't, from what I can see and how I analyze the situation, those aren't really two stances that you're going to be able to reconcile.
After the break, I continue my conversation with Ernst van Zyl, but we're going to be shifting the conversation to Donald Trump and, of course, his comments that have been made in the last week. Do stay tuned. Welcome back to Talking Point. Now, of course, last week, Donald Trump signed an executive order stopping financial aid to South Africa. Now, this was done without any consultation with the union buildings. And he says that, of course, as I mentioned earlier on, this is due to quote-unquote land grabs that are occurring. And, of course, he once again made the comment that there is a quote-unquote white genocide that is occurring with regards to our Afrikaner compatriots here in South Africa. Ernst, I listened to a lot of what he says. I read his tweets, and I'm just asking myself, I'm trying to find, and really from an objective point of view, some sort of method to his madness. From an AfriForum perspective, I beg your pardon, is this not a rash decision that was made by him with regards to cutting financial aid without really consulting the stakeholders within this country?
Well, just a point of clarification, you can correct me if I'm wrong. I didn't see anywhere Donald Trump calling what's happening in South Africa a genocide. Like I said, if you can point me to where he said that,
sure.
we much appreciate it. In regards to particularly your specific question, I don't think the president of the United States really has to consult the countries that before he takes actions in the interest of his own country. I think every country has that right. The South African president doesn't have to consult America before he makes decisions that will impact America if he believes that there is something wrong that's being done in America, or America is not acting right towards South Africa. So I think in regards to what's happened here is Donald Trump is fully in his rights to sign that executive order, to make the statements that he has in regards to how he perceives what's happening in South Africa. The content of those statements, and the content specifically of the executive order and other announcements, like, for example, what Marco Rubio made regarding G20, we can get into that. There's a fascinating conversation to be had there. But I think Donald Trump is fully in his rights to do what he did in regards to his actions the past 2 weeks. And AfriForum has no problem with it. So we actually welcome the pressure that he has put on the South African government.
Yeah, but to what extent, though, Ernst? Look at our economy. Both you and I would agree. We're all trying to, every South African wants to see this economy grow. I know you're not politically involved, and of course, AfriForum acts as a lobby group, but given the sort of character that Donald Trump is, surely he could have come to the table with government and say, listen, let's find a way forward. I listened to Thabo Mbeki during the week, and he said South Africa have always had great relations with Republican presidents, even as a hardline Republican like George W. Bush himself, who led the U.S. in war against Afghanistan and Iraq. So, surely there could have been some sort of a consideration for dialogue before this decision was made.
Well, if you look at how the ANC and specifically President Cyril Ramaphosa have communicated towards the United States in the past regarding criticism from specifically Donald Trump, I think he learned a lesson in 2018. In 2018, when he simply made a tweet about South Africa, the South African government lashed out, attacked him, called him a spreader of misinformation, a liar. The president of South Africa, Cyril Ramaphosa, in a very demeaning way, just brushed off what Donald Trump was saying, said that he should stay out of South African affairs, he shouldn't even comment on them, told him to leave South Africa, to keep his America, and we will keep our South Africa. So I think Donald Trump learned a lesson in 2018 that this South African government, the ANC, is an arrogant party that doesn't really listen to just words. They need actions to listen, and I think that's what he did this time around. 2018, when he was his previous term, he simply used words. He simply criticized the South African government, and he just got a lashing out and an unhinged response. This time around, he said, "All right, if you don't want to come to the table and discuss, if you don't listen to words, then I will talk with action." And that is what he did this time around. And it's not Donald Trump that passed the Expropriation Act that threatens private property rights in South Africa. It's not Donald Trump that puts 141 race laws on the books in South Africa. That's the South African government. And Donald Trump and his administration are reacting to those realities. If the South African government was really interested in cooperation, dialogue, debate, and the interaction as you described there, they would have come to the table to discuss with people internally in South Africa, stakeholders like AfriForum that approached the ANC many times saying, we want to solve this internally in South Africa. But they rejected that opportunity. And as I said earlier, when they were criticized previously by Donald Trump in 2018, they also just reacted with hubris and arrogance rather than inviting him to the table to discuss. So I think Donald Trump here is a Donald Trump that with experience dealing with the ANC. He has now changed his tactics because the first time around, conversation, words didn't work. So now he's been forced to take action. And I think that blame for these actions lies squarely at the feet of the ANC and their radical rhetoric and extremist policies.
All right. Ernst, Donald Trump has said that he would accept any Afrikaner who wants to come through to the United States as a refugee. I want to ask AfriForum this question. Do you really think Trump cares about the well-being of the Afrikaner group?
Well, I mean, to answer that question substantially, you would actually have to know him personally and look into his own heart. But I mean, judging by his actions, he's been keeping a keen eye on South Africa for many years now. He has many friends personally from South Africa. I've seen in his friends' circles. I know the golf player Gary Player is one of them. Elon Musk from South Africa is also very close to Trump, and he has been talking about and mentioning South Africa for many years. The previous time that he made the news headlines here in South Africa regarding talking about South Africa was in 2018, as I previously mentioned, when he also mentioned, for example, farm attacks here in South Africa. So I think without knowing Trump personally, without knowing exactly all the details of his connection to South Africa, he does seem to have a very strong focus on the country, and particularly the minorities of this country, as is demonstrated by everything he's said over the years. Now, of course, there's complexities to any such a matter. I don't think Donald Trump is just taking these actions out of just a personal focus on or a personal admiration or a sense of care for Afrikaners. I think there's also the national interests of America, of course, are going to factor into that. His whole motto is America first. So, of course, America's interests are going to factor into his decisions. And the ANC have really invited these actions, as I said earlier, through the policies that they push in South Africa, the type of rhetoric that they push towards the United States for years now. What's happening now is just the chickens coming home to roost for years of what the ANC has done. So I think, particularly, just to wrap up my answer to your question, does Donald Trump really care? He does seem to have, as I said, a focus on South Africa, particularly the Afrikaners, that he doesn't have for every other group in the world. He does seem to have an interest, but as I said, I'm not part of his personal circle. I don't know him personally, so I can't give you the insider scoop on why that is. But judging on his actions and what he has said for the past 7 or 8 years, he does have a soft spot for the Afrikaners here in South Africa. And why that is, I mean, that's up for speculation.
Of course, he would be the best person to answer that. I just want to address, of course, the white genocide, and I want to retract that comment because I'm reading now, obviously, the U.S. Embassy and Consulate in South Africa. It says here, in order to address serious human rights violations occurring in South Africa, as encapsulated in the recent land confiscation, the government of South Africa blatantly discriminates against ethnic minority descendants of settler groups. As long as South Africa supports bad actors on the world stage and allows violent attacks on innocent, disfavored minority farmers, the United States will stop aid and assistance to the country. So in this right here, he's saying that there are human rights violations that are occurring. This is according to the U.S. Embassy and Consulates in South Africa's statement that they have done. Now, you've heard other South African citizens of Afrikaner origin saying that they're not going to go anywhere. Even AfriForum themselves said that they're not going to go anywhere. So why would he be saying these things? I mean, given that I think both you and I, Ernst, want to see South Africa grow. But surely these statements don't really assist in trying to foster any supposed reconciliation that all of us South Africans are trying to garner.
Well, my answer to that would be threatening the private property rights of your citizens and having 141 race laws on the books don't really facilitate reconciliation in any way. Also, scapegoating and blaming
But wait,
minorities.
I'm sorry, I'm stopping you. I'm talking about you and I. I'm talking about you and I, South Africa.
Yes.
Let's forget government. Surely you and I, as normal tax-paying citizens of the country, really want to try and foster a sense of unity, a sense of togetherness, of reconciliation. I went to a Model C white school, Ernst, and I could see that a lot of the people during that time when it was something new to have different races coming together, we all wanted to create a sense of reconciliation. So you forget the government perspective, just you and I as normal South Africans. Surely that's something that we want to create. And Donald Trump doesn't assist in that by making these comments of potential human rights violations that are occurring.
But there are human rights violations occurring. I mean, the South African Human Rights Commission found that, just an example, my old university, Stellenbosch University, my alma mater, the South African Human Rights Commission found about 2 years ago that human rights violations were being committed by the university, against Afrikaans-speaking students at the university, by the university and university representatives prohibiting Afrikaans students from speaking their mother tongue, even in private. So that's just one example. Then also you have, you have this type of rhetoric where politicians in this country threaten and malign and villainize and antagonize and scapegoat the minorities in this country for all the problems that the country faces. And when AfriForum then speaks out against that, that's not an attack on unity or an attack on harmony. That is actually opposition to a force that is driving a racial agenda, that's driving a wedge between people. So when it comes to this type of pressure from Donald Trump and his administration, that type of pressure is necessary because and that's why, I mean, I understand why you're saying let's not talk about the government, but you can't really not talk about the government when you're talking about the matter of race relations and racial harmony, because the major driver of antagonism in South Africa is the South African government and many politicians through their rhetoric, through their policies, and through how they scapegoat minorities in this country. And I think, therefore, the pressure on the government to stop that is a positive development, because it needs to stop. Otherwise, there will be no form of genuine reconciliation. Otherwise, the wounds will continue to be scratched open, and there will be continued racial tension inflamed by politicians. So they need to stop. They need to stop pushing these extremist policies. They need to stop with the extremist rhetoric. And if someone on the outside, like Donald Trump, has to step in to tell them enough now, this is not acceptable how you are behaving towards particularly the minority groups in your country, then so be it. Because at the moment, it seems like the only thing that will make the ANC listen is genuine pressure and a genuine force on the balance of forces, as they like to say, rather than just a debate and conversation, which they have clearly just slammed the door in the faces of those who want to solve this internally in South Africa.
As we go to the break, I will agree with you on there, Ernst, that any killing of farmers, black or white, or any discrimination against the language, as you mentioned, at the University of Pretoria, should not be allowed, given that Afrikaans is still one of the 11 languages of South Africa, and is still a language that is being taught at various of our high schools. Well, after the break, I'm going to wrap up the conversation with Ernst van Zyl, and we're going to keep this discussion with regards to Donald Trump, South Africa, and of course the Land Expropriation Act that was signed last month. Do stay tuned. Welcome back to Talking Point. We're in the final segment of this conversation I'm having with AfriForum's Head of Public Relations, Ernst van Zyl. Ernst, before we go to obviously wrapping up this conversation, I just want to have one more question with regards to Donald Trump, of course, offering refugee status to any Afrikaner that wants to come to the USA. And it makes me think back, and of course you would have better history because, you know, these were your ancestors, going back to the Second Anglo-Boer War, where over 100,000 Afrikaner South Africans were killed, and they were killed at the hands of the British in these dire concentration camps. And of course, they were classified refugees at this time. I mean, given that horrific past, I mean, surely this is something AfriForum or any other Afrikaner really wants to be associated with, given that horrible past which occurred at the start of the 1900s.
Well, in regards to that, the label of being labeled a refugee, I mean, in regards to the Anglo-Boer War, the people that were sent to the concentration camps were still in their own country. They weren't refugees in England. So I'm struggling a little bit with the connection there. But I mean,
no. The point I'm trying to say is that the fact that they were treated like subhuman citizens at the time. Yeah,
I understand.
Yeah.
So in regards to particularly Donald Trump's point on refugee status, I mean, AfriForum's message again here is nuanced, and I'm glad that you give me the opportunity to get into the meat and potatoes of it. So AfriForum's stance there is very clear. Well, firstly, it's not an offer that is extended to AfriForum as an organization. So I see there's some media houses reporting that AfriForum, in quote unquote, rejects Donald Trump's offer. It's not AfriForum's offer to reject or accept. AfriForum as an organization can only explain why we as an organization remain in South Africa, and that's because AfriForum has a very clear central mission, and our central mission is to create a prosperous future here in South Africa for our members and for all in South Africa, but we have a particular focus on the Afrikaners and the Afrikaans language, and we want to create a future where that language is prosperous and where that culture can still exist and thrive. And AfriForum genuinely believes that that is only possible within South Africa, the country where the Afrikaans language originated and where the Afrikaner culture originated. So when it comes to this opportunity to gain refugee status in America, AfriForum will stop no one or tell anyone that they're not allowed to accept this option. But from our side, we will be building for a future here in South Africa. That has been our mission and our message for many years, and it remains the same message and mission in 2025. And we wanted to underline that message in our recent press conference, because I know a lot of people, both domestically and abroad, will see that message and be confused, and rightly so. I understand that many people can't join the dots between, but on the one side your situation is dire, on the other side you're not going to leave. Well, the very simple fact of the matter there is, even though there is racially discriminatory laws in South Africa, even though private property rights are being targeted, and even though the Afrikaans language in education is being targeted by destructive acts like the Bella Bill, we still here as AfriForum still are fighting and building for a future here, even despite the difficult circumstances, because as I said, we firmly believe that the only place where Afrikaners can have a prosperous and a flourishing future is in the country where the culture and our language originated. While at the same time, as I said, the nuance here is important, while at the same time not denying anyone or shaming or attacking anyone that were to take Donald Trump up on his offer, and to those who are going to apply for refugee status. I think that's the most simplest way of putting it.
And to the next question, of course, I think you've just answered it. AfriForum still has a sense of patriotism to South Africa, if I stand to be corrected.
As I said, AfriForum is here to stay. We're building for the future. Well, I genuinely believe that Afrikaners are an essential ingredient for Afrikaners are an essential ingredient for a successful future here in South Africa, because South Africa, at the end of the day, is a community of communities. South Africa is filled with many cultures, different languages, and when you do polling amongst those different cultures and languages and religions, they all say the same thing. The vast majority of them, when polled extensively, always answer that the different races and the different cultures need each other and need to cooperate for a better future. And that's where AfriForum wants to bring our expertise, our knowledge, our talents, and our love for this part of the world called South Africa to the table. But at the same time, we want to do that simultaneously while also putting a simple demand on the table, and that is to not be discriminated against, not to be scapegoated, and not to have chants about murdering us based on our identity from high-profile politicians. What AfriForum and the wider solidarity movements demand can really be summed up in one word, and it's normality. We just want normality when it comes to how we are treated as minorities in this country, how politicians, what the rhetoric regarding us is like from politicians, the temperature of the political environment. And that's all we want. We don't want to be threatened with expropriation without compensation. We want to be able to have our children educated in their mother tongue. And we don't want politicians encouraging violent crime like farm murders to stadiums of thousands of people. Those are simple things that Afrikaners want. And then lastly, before I forget, we also don't want discriminatory laws that bar us from promotion or from being hired at certain places, as has been the case many times. So as I said, just to wrap it up, AfriForum and the Solidarity Movement really just want normality. We don't want to live anywhere else. We want to live in South Africa. This is our home. Our culture and our language are indigenous to South Africa. There's no other country in the world where Afrikaners or Afrikaans are indigenous to. And that's the reality within which AfriForum says we're building to stay, and we're staying to build even under difficult circumstances.
One final question, Ernst, to wrap up this conversation. As I mentioned earlier on, and you've of course agreed with me, many Afrikaners, they've categorically said, we want to stay in South Africa. You've said it. The culture is here, the tradition is here. This is home, and this is home for all of us also. There, of course, are more than one generations that have been here within this country. So how does AfriForum, along with many Afrikaners, alongside myself as somebody from Indian descent, and others, whether it's black, colored, different parts of the Asian group, work together to make South Africa an equitable place, given that South Africa still struggles from the remnants of apartheid and colonialism. And of course, a lot of it has not been helped by the governing party, who of course not been able to deliver services to areas that are struggling at this very moment. So how do we allow that to happen? How do we allow that equitable society to occur in South Africa, given all of these challenges that have been presented to us?
Right. I mean, that's a topic or a question that we could already talk about for another hour.
Sure,
but I'll try to keep it as short as possible. So I think the first winning ingredient will be mutual recognition and respect in regards to the different cultures and groups in South Africa. And then also the other winning ingredient is the fact that everyone deserves a stake in the future of this country. When a certain law is being debated, you can't just write off, for example, the concerns of a minority group, whether that be a religious or an ethnic minority or a racial minority or a cultural minority, just because they are the minority. They also have a stake in this country. And the alternative would be a tyranny of the majority, which I don't think would really qualify as democratic in any way. So when it comes to particularly how do we solve the various issues that we are seeing still persist in South Africa, is firstly give everyone, whether they be a large group or a small group, a minority or a majority, give them all a stake in the conversation regarding how we solve these issues. And don't just write groups off because they are demographically not the majority or because they are a demographically smaller group than another group. And then lastly, I think what's also important is to not just write off the concerns of any group in this country as just being because of hate or racism or whatever evil malice you want to attribute to that. I think all cultures in this country have genuine concerns, legitimate aspirations, and legitimate issues that they care about. But the Afrikaner culture is the same in that regard. The best example would be farm murders. Why do Afrikaners care so deeply about the issue of farm murders? Because Afrikaners, a synonym for Afrikaners is boer, which literally means farmer. The Afrikaner culture is very closely connected to farming, to the extent where if you are not yourself a farmer, you have a family member that farms, and if you don't have a family member that farms, you have a friend that works or works on a farm or is a farmer. So that's just an example, and that applies to all cultural groups in South Africa. Different cultural groups and different ethnicities in South Africa have their own issues that they care very deeply about, and I think these concerns are legitimate and shouldn't just be written off as they're doing it because they hate the rest or because they want to sow chaos or because they're treasonous or whatever other buzzwords people want to use. I think mutual recognition and respect is the way forward. And the best way to do that is actually to listen to people and different groups on why they care so much about particular issues. I guarantee you there's a very good reason if people just stop to listen and give them the time of day.
And unfortunately, we have actually gone over time. Thank you so much for the conversation. Much appreciated.
Thank you very much, Fahraaz. It was a very professional interview and refreshingly based on facts the whole way through.
No, you're welcome. That's Ernst van Zyl, AfriForum Head of Public Relations. Well, that's all we have for you here on Talking Point from myself, Fahraaz Patel, and the rest of the team in Johannesburg. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.